I wonder if he even thought that far. Like, if this guy's smart enough for this heist, but the last moment he's like, I'm just gonna jump, and I'm like, oh man, it's snowing.
So, are you guys familiar with the D.B. Cooper case?
Love D.B. Cooper, dude.
Fucking love D.B. Cooper.
It's still unsolved, right?
On November 24th, 1971, a man calling himself Dan Cooper, he goes to a Portland airport. He gets on an airplane. Back then, you could just get on a plane. You could even pay to be on the plane while you're on the plane. Right? It's fucking crazy. And he used cash to buy a one-way ticket on Flight 305 bound for Seattle. Shortly after the flight takes off, he slips the stewardess a note saying that he has a bomb in his briefcase, and he demands that she writes down what he told her to. The stewardess made her way to the captain's cabin with a new note that she had written, which demanded 4 parachutes and $200,000 in $20 bills. When the flight landed in Seattle, he then exchanged the hostages, all the flight's 36 passengers, for money and parachutes. And then he kept the crew, and the plane took off again, and he's like, yo, take me to Mexico. Somewhere between Seattle and Reno, Nevada, a little after 8 p.m., he opens the back of the plane, puts a parachute on, jumps out with the ransom money, and nobody fucking ever saw him again.
That's so crazy. Boy.
Isn't that crazy? That's the minute 30 summation of the case. So there's been a lot of research about this case, a lot of thoughts about who's behind it. They've found cash over the years, like in lake beds, like because where he the acreage of where he could have jumped out is like a lot of wetlands, and a lot of people are like, man, he probably just died. Like some investigators just determined that there's no way he could have survived that night. It was stormy. It was cold as shit. There was so much rain. He could have like just died when like landing on a tree or something. He could just be hanging up in a tree somewhere, like where nobody's ever found him, right? But the mystery just took a turn.
Uh-oh.
Did they find those dollars that in circulation that he stole?
I wish.
Oh.
They found a necktie. The black tie that belonged to him that he left on the plane, they did some analysis on. And they found 3 what they call important particles that are significant. And there is something that they can maybe amount to a DNA pattern that points to a specific company and a very specific division within the company at a specific time.
What company?
So he analyzed these lab reports, right? And it shows like a bunch of different metal particles on the tie, and he was able to match that up with a Pennsylvania metal manufacturing company that was operational at the same time, and that had special patents on those specific metals and alloys that were found.
Oh, so that was the identifier.
Exactly.
So they think that he worked there.
Exactly. So he contacts the company, and he looked into employees who worked there in the 60s and 70s, and then went to Pittsburgh where the company was based, and then he narrowed it down to about 8 researchers who were working on those specific metal projects at the time.
And then they disappeared. Which one disappeared?
Well, that's kind of what they, it's you can't get an exact story of who at the time, right? Because there's so many different people that were working at this place. But what he determined is that talking with a retired company manager, he said that there was an employee named Vince Peterson that kind of fit the bill for what happened at the time that D.B. Cooper made his jump. And this was like a national news story at the time. And he was also somebody, oddly enough, who regularly traveled to the Pacific Northwest on business, where D.B. Cooper was jumped out, right? But this guy died in 2002, and then they interviewed his family, and then his son is like, I don't think my dad's D.B. Cooper, but who knows if his son's like sitting on cash. But the cash has never been found to be used in circulation. Like, they had those bills, and they marked the bills so they know if they were going to be used. I've been obsessed with the story for years.
So he went back to work, and he's still alive.
This particular trail went to this guy named Peterson who died in 2002.
Yeah, but this Peterson guy, if he was D.B. Cooper, he just went back to work as usual. So in this story, if that was, he didn't get lost in the forest. He went back to work as a researcher. He has children, all that stuff.
That's a really good question. They don't say that he went back to work. They just said that he worked there at that specific time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because that would be the best mask, I guess, is like to just continue life as normal.
Yeah, for sure.
After you do your heist, chill out for a minute, then maybe wash the cash in other ways.
Yeah, how would he wash the cash?
Yeah, that's my question.
Internationally.
Okay, really?
But I mean, at the same time, that's a lot of cash to wash. Especially, I mean, what, 200,000?
In 20s.
Yeah.
20, but what was that, the 60s?
70s?
What did I just say at the beginning? 71.
So that might be like $1 million now. It just depends, because back then there's like, it's all paper, right? So like, it really depends on like how well their tracking was. And if it would flag anything because of the cash came from where.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're wondering too, because it was like heavy, like the briefcase that he had was heavy. So they're wondering too if when he jumped out, like that night, it was like, well, it depends on exactly where, because they don't exactly know where he fell, obviously, because once he's out of the plane, he could have positioned himself wherever with the parachute. But they believe that the elevation. They don't even know exactly what the elevation was where he landed, but the weather was so rough and there was steady snowfall for 4 days afterwards. So whatever his path out of this thing was, it was brutal. And then he's carrying a fuck ton of cash.
He must have had a really strategic plan to keep himself safe.
Yeah, or to bury the cash and then.
Yeah, and then.
I wonder if he even thought that far. Like, if this guy's smart enough for this heist, but the last moment he's like, I'm just gonna jump, and I'm like, oh man, it's snowing.
Bag's heavy. Why is it so heavy?
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't know.
So what do you think, Steve?
Well, okay, so there's the part of my brain that just wants him to have made it out there, and he's like sitting on a beach somewhere, and he's like, everyone.
Put that somewhere else. Put that somewhere else.
So I think that because the cash never made it in circulation, ever, like they found some in a lake bed a couple of times. Like there's a kid who's like playing one day, like I want to say like 15 years later, and they found some of the cash, and they were able to identify it as the bills from some of the bills from the DB Cooper incident. So that makes me think that maybe he died and the money was scattered around.
Yeah.
And maybe he's like in a tree somewhere, and like just the money, because of where the lakes were, they were able to trace it. Like, okay, so this probably came down this stream here, and then like found its way to this lake, to this side of this riverbed, and that's where the kid found it. So maybe he died somewhere upstream, and then the cash just fell and
scattered.
Yeah, I think he died. I think he died after like jumping out.
Odds are highly in favor that he just died.
Yeah.
Especially if he has no survival skills.
Yeah,
it was his first time parachuting.
Well, there's a lot of there's a lot of theories that he was ex-military because of the way that he talked, and the way that he was dressed, and the way that he asked for the specific parachutes. Like he kind of knew what he was doing with that. There was some kind of preparation that went into it.
Then he must have known. You know what I mean? Well, I guess how was like weather forecasting back then?
Fucking have no idea.
You know what I mean?
No Doppler
today.
But it's just such a weird thing that if he died, then that means whatever life he left behind wasn't looking for him. So that's kind of weird.
Yeah. Well, and the thought too is, okay, so if he jumps out, ends up in higher elevations, he fell into a snowstorm. If he landed lower elevations, he fell into a rainstorm. So like, there's a huge difference in survivability right there. Yeah. He was also just wearing regular shoes and a business suit when he jumped out. He didn't have like a parka on or survival gear. Like he's just fucking wearing.
Isn't that the funniest curse though? Like you get away with this money and then you die because you just didn't plan and you're in a shitty weather conditions.
I know, dude. And he jumped out. It's cold as shit. He's fucking dripping. There's no way he's not like covered in rainwater, right?
Yeah.
And then never seen again. How do you get out of there with dress shoes on? Like I don't know, dude.
And on top of that, like the first thing you probably do is just hide the cash to get it later.
Yeah, if it's heavy enough, yeah.
Figure out a way to find shelter.
Yep.
But then you run the risk of someone calling the cops.
Yeah.
Did any of you guys see the documentary that's out right now on it?
I've seen a bunch of them. I don't know if I've seen the most recent.
There's like a newest one that really has awesome real suspects that they were really like some of the people at the lead of investigative reporting of it now that are like obsessed like they're crazy people over this case. They've like determined who they really believe it is, and sometimes it's like a living guy, and they found a guy that like fit all of the everything you could think of except for like a couple timeline things, and that guy was declining on admitting whether or not he was, and then he died before they could finish the.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and then the crazy thing is, yeah, they think he was like definitely military, that he was prepared, that. Yeah, the way that he spoke, the things that he asked for, it doesn't seem like a guy that would jump out and not have a plan.
Yeah.
Especially where he jumped out.
Exactly, yeah.
Or a guy that was so calculated to make people assume that he would die. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Yeah, and he didn't make mistakes leading up to when there was no trace. So it's not like you can pick
He could have had a cabin or something ready.
or another team like that were waiting, like an
Pick him
extraction.
up.
Yeah. It's likely.
That's what a lot of people think. That's what was part of one of the documentaries.
Because you think he knew where he was, like coordinates wise, and then he's like, all right, now this is around the area that I'm gonna jump.
Well, he knew where he was taking off, right? And he knew where he wanted the plane pointed towards and heading towards before he made his jump. And then he just randomly opens the door and jumps out. So I don't think he just does that.
Right.
He knew he was being tailed, obviously.
Yeah.
So I think he used the cover of the storm to like make sure that the tail didn't see him get out, because they didn't see him get out.
There's just something like in terms of the timeline and the evidence of what he did. Once you can't see him anymore, there's no telling what he did. So that's why it's hard to find. Like, so far it's like flawless. So it's like, why would he start making mistakes once you can't see him?
The biggest mistake of all.
Yeah, exactly. So it's sort of like odds are that he's dead. Of course, those are the odds. But then everything he did, the odds were against
so
him, and he
calculated.
still won. So it's like, damn, man, what did he do?
The fact that they never found like him, like, is wild to me.
And there's also a thing that you would probably like, Joe, is that they think he was connected to the feds in some way.
Wow.
Because there was a guy that was a suspect who used to do he did government work for feds. I think he was like trafficking certain things for feds that couldn't do it themselves, and they thought it was him because they were like, oh, the reason they don't want to pursue him is because he's too connected to something that like he knows something that he could kind of come out with. So it's not that they can't find him, it's that they won't find him.
Whoa.
There's that.
And maybe they did and killed him.
Yeah, because of course it's not an average guy. So they're like, oh, he might have been somebody that was like in between the feds and something bad, and they were like, just let him fucking go.
It's only 200 grand to them.
I've never seen a case like this where there's constantly little breaks in it, like where it's like me and Nikki did a podcast about this years ago, and that was like the most uppermost information, and then today it's like, holy shit, they found this tire with these particles on it. It's like there's such an interest in it still. It's such an active investigation for being so old, because there's just so much imagination behind it.
Yeah, I think that would be the next odds, like dead, and then the next one is that he's too well connected that they're just not.
Gotta find him.
It's just not a thing they want to know.
Right. Damn.
Could be that too.
That's cool.
It is really cool.
Case of DB Cooper.